Today, Joe Ritchie and Chris Hunter will moderate, and I'll turn it over to Chris Hunter to introduce our speakers.
Kicking off the discussion today with a regional overview of his collected analysis of the demand for workforce housing is Mr. Alex Coma. Alex is the economic development reporter at the Washington Business Journal. Since 2019, he's covered departments, housing, transportation, politics, and more across the DC region. Previously, he's worked for news outlets covering Arlington, Prince William County, and Charlottesville.
So what I'd like to try to do today is to provide some perspective on what's happening in the region around affordable housing, but also along the Silver Line corridor, specifically the challenges that have been brought on by COVID in particular. Basically, the first thing that I wanted to start off by talking about is where the need is. I think that all of us, anyone who looks at rent prices can sense that there is at least a general need, but I wanted to try and really drill down on where specifically, we're seeing the most need. So for my first bullet point, Zena, I think the main thing to consider is that, there's affordability needs across all income levels. There is no income level, right now where we are not seeing, renters cost burdened at this point. So, what that means is that I think a lot of us can hear the term affordable housing and think that it may be for people only at the bottom of the income spectrum. However, that's certainly not the case. There's a reason why workforce housing is the term that we used, in coming up with this session. And you can go to my next bullet. We've got to think about this as, a need that exists across all different income levels. So that means, a workforce level as well as an affordable level. Consider that, many of the needs exist across people making 60 to 80% of the area median income. I mean, that may not sound like a lot, but in Fairfax, for example, that's defined as about $53,000 for someone making 60% of the area median income, $70,000 for 80%. And even many definitions of workforce housing tend to extend all the way up to 100 or 120% of the area median income, which in Fairfax, that would be about $88,000. I mean, you're not poor if you're making that amount of money, yet nevertheless, we are still seeing a need for, housing that is affordable to these renters. So you can go to my next bullet. We're seeing critical shortages in Loudoun and Fairfax for even people at the higher ends of those income brackets. This is an issue that the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments has been studying over the last year or so. And what they recently found in working with the Urban Institute is that in Fairfax alone, there is a need for something like 26,900 new homes just to reach renters of this, workforce income level. And that is to say nothing of housing that would reach people at the lowest affordability brackets. Loudoun is in a similar, boat. They have a need that looked like 14,900 units per their estimates over the coming decade. So all of this is to say, this is an issue that if it's not on your mind, it certainly should be. And you can go to my next slide. So, in particular, in looking at, how the Silver Line can impact this, those same researchers at the Council of Governments, they've been very clear. Not only do they want to see new housing, but they also want to see new housing, the majority of which I believe their target is 75% built near transit. I mean, that makes sense. If you're going to meet your climate and sustainability goals, that's where the housing is going to go. And the Silver Line has provided a tremendous amount of opportunity in that regard. So you can go to my next bullet. Fairfax has already started to move in this direction, as some of my colleagues on the panel here will tell you. They've got workforce dwelling unit requirements that are largely focused around the Silver Line stations. In Tyson's in particular, they went through an effort to ensure that there were specific, higher density bonuses available in a urbanizing area around the Silver Line that would also ensure some new affordable housing. Reston as well has seen some of that, and Loudoun is moving in the same direction. They just approved, you might have heard me speak at the retail session about their new comprehensive plan changes passed just last year. That's something folks worked for years on in Loudoun, and a huge amount of that is focused on adapting for the arrival of Metro. They've created a whole new urban policy area, which is a way to designate sites around Metro stations where, they're expecting as many 5,000 new housing units in that policy area alone over the coming years. And that's going to go a long way to meeting the housing need that the Urban Institute identified. You can go to my next slide. Now, the challenge, is that in many ways before COVID, there was this huge amount of momentum around the issue. I mean, witness the fact that we're talking about this at all. Fairfax County initially had been calling for a huge increase in their affordable housing loan fund, money that can be leveraged by affordable developers. This was something that Fairfax County supervisors had been yearning to do since the days of Jerry Connolly, when he was still the chair of the board. He instituted a penny on the real estate tax that was dedicated specifically to affordable housing efforts. The Great Recession ultimately convinced supervisors to undo that. Eventually, the board was hoping to get it back, and they had put that in the budget for 2021. This was a huge deal, but it could have meant as much as a housing fund that was looking in the 40 millions of dollars. That would be a huge increase, that they were very excited about. You can go to my next bullet. Loudoun was also beginning to explore a dedicated revenue stream for a similar affordable housing fund. That is a key emphasis of Phyllis Randall, who is the chair of the Board of Supervisors. If you've heard her speak on similar panels, this is a focus for her. You can go to my next bullet. And crucially, there was statewide progress as well. I mean, the state has generally not taken a big role in funding affordable housing over the years, often viewing it as the responsibility of localities. Even in the Amazon deal to bring them to Arlington, they left it mostly to the localities, but there was momentum here. The governor, Governor Northam, was very supportive. He had put money in his budget for the new housing fund that they were working on that would have looked like $30 million each year after this year. And really, broadly, as the bullet tells you, there's a growing awareness in the whole region. This was a discussion that's happening both in the localities I outlined, but it's happening in DC, where Mayor Muriel Bowser has made housing the centerpiece of her second term agenda. They have a housing loan fund, the Housing Production Trust Fund, that is $100 million a year. That gives you a sense of the scale of the money that policymakers think is necessary to address these challenges. I mentioned Amazon. Arlington and Alexandria were both planning investments to try and match the arrival of a company and its highly paid workers in the region. Even Prince George's County, if you want to go a little farther afield, was thinking for the first time this year about overhauling their affordable housing policies after assembling a work group to do it. And now you can go to my next slide. This is all a very long way of leading up to a very big, but here, which is the COVID crisis that all of us are dealing with, and especially our local governments. In this chart here on the right, you can see, this is something that we prepared for a cover story a couple months ago, and you can see the amounts of money that were proposed in each one of these jurisdictions before COVID hit. And then ultimately what it had to, be slashed to. I mean, so in Fairfax County, I mentioned it already. The penny on the tax rate that they wanted to put on, they had to walk back all tax increases. Loudoun County, very similar situation. They put a hold on a lot of their spending simply to understand what the budget picture would look like. And so, we can't really know yet the full picture of how things are looking. And so localities are proceeding very cautiously, and that goes as well for the state. They have left some money for the Virginia Housing Trust Fund in the budget for this coming year, but in future fiscal years, a lot of that progress has been undone. So you can go to my next slide. And so I guess the question, and the other folks on the panel will tell you more about this, but why does this matter? Why does it matter that money for affordable housing is getting cut out of these budgets, or at the very least wasn't able to be raised by as much as many advocates were hoping for? I mean, they are a crucial part of many affordable projects' capital stack. You talk to any developer in this world, and they can tell you that, if you go to my next bullet, with the high cost of materials and labor, it's often extremely difficult to reach renters, even at that 60 to 80% AMI range, that $53,000 to $80,000 range, let alone people who are making, the poorest renters in the market, the people who are below 30% of the area median income. And while I've spoken with many nonprofit developers who are doing their best to stay this course, there are some that have told me, look, we have no choice but to start at the very least delaying projects because we can't be certain that we're going to get, a loan from these loan funds in this coming year's cycle. And it's really hard to make the case to investors that you should get, private money when you can't guarantee that a crucial piece of your capital stack is going to be there. So if you go to my next slide, and this is where I think the rest of our panelists will also do a really good job of addressing what do we do about this exactly? And, thankfully, people are out there thinking creatively about it. In Fairfax County, I know Chairman Jeff McKay is already, trying to convene these discussions about potential policy changes that they can make that will not necessarily have a fiscal impact. So from my understanding, they're taking a pretty broad brush with this in looking at, where can we offer higher density in exchange for more affordability? Where can we, for instance, something they started doing before the pandemic, how can they open up more accessory dwelling units? Think of that mother-in-law suite that can be a way to provide a piece of that missing middle housing stock. Even, exploring some solutions like taking public land, think of the parking lots around the Fairfax County Government Center, and potentially moving that into the Housing and Redevelopment Authority to turn that into affordable housing. Loudoun, meanwhile, they've been seeing an extremely fast, pace of development, even without much intervention from the government itself. Those comprehensive plan changes on their own, even in an uncertain market with coronavirus, are still attracting a lot of new applications. Look no further than Peterson Company's decision to pursue residential around Commonwealth Center, One Loudoun looking to do the same. Even a development that's been stalled at Tall Cedars Parkway and Route 50 has seen new residential applications because people want to build housing. So the more housing there is, the more of that can be affordable and the more it can drive cost pressures down for renters all along the income spectrum. And then, there's a more ambitious policy tools that people are talking about, but albeit these are very much in the early stages. Alexandria has talked about, pursuing inclusionary zoning, where you say, if you're going to build a high density building in this area, you have to have this much, new affordable housing. That's something that right now wouldn't be legal in Virginia. We're a Dillon rule state, and localities can only do what the state, say that they can do. But that's a policy change that they've bandied about bringing to lawmakers in Richmond. If this goes on longer and affordability pressures, grow more acute, I suspect you could see people talking about that. Of course, there are considerations that developers are thinking about as well, but there are other ambitious solutions. I mean, DC just started their own local low-income housing tax credit program. Anytime that a project, gets these federal tax credits, they can match those directly with local tax credits. It may be a tough sell for localities to give up tax revenue at this moment in time, but that's the sort of, solution that people are pursuing to say, if we can't spend money ourselves, how can we be creative about incenting people to get into the market? And you may go to my final slide because those, were the big issues that I wanted to cover. However, I always like to be sure to leave my contact info so that you can reach out to me at any time. Feel free to screenshot or ask me for this afterward. I only know what people tell me. So please, if you have insights on affordable housing and development in the Northern Virginia area and the Silver Line Corridor, reach out anytime. I am eager to hear from you. And I yield to the rest of my esteemed panelists here and look forward to hearing any questions at the end.
Speaking next on insights from Fairfax County are Graham Owen and Abdi Ahmad. Graham is a senior planner with the Department of Planning and Development in Fairfax County, where he works on long-range planning studies and comprehensive plan amendments, including those related to workforce, affordable housing, development, and preservation. Prior to joining Fairfax County in 2019, he worked for the Planning Department of Palo Alto, California, where he led staff efforts to develop an affordable housing zoning overlay district to incentivize the development of multifamily housing projects along transit corridors. Abdi is an affordable and workforce housing program administrator in Fairfax County Department of Housing and Community Development. Abdi has over 15 years of experience administrating the county's inclusionary zoning policies. He currently oversees the administration of the affordable and workforce dwelling unit programs, which expects to percentage a new residential construction to be set aside for ADUs and WDUs for income eligible working households.
I'm Graham Owen, planner with Fairfax County, and as has been said, I'm joined by Abdi Ahmad, who is our workforce and affordable housing program administrator. And so I was scribbling some notes as Alex was talking, and I'm really glad that he brought up the 60 to 80% of AMI for workforce housing in particular, because that's something that Abdi and I have been working on hand in glove over the past couple of months on those three words in particular, 60 to 80% AMI. So we'll come back to that, but I think it's a really interesting segue into our discussion. So we really wanted to touch base with this group on affordable and workforce housing in Fairfax County in particular. I know that with COVID, it certainly has impacted our funding and what we're able to do on the monetary side. But I can say with certainty that affordable housing does remain a top priority for the Board of Supervisors in Fairfax, whether it's through inclusionary land use policies that Abdi and I are going to talk about, or some other changes that are not less on the policy side, more on the zoning side, such as lesser restrictions for accessory living units with our zoning modernization effort, which we call ZMOD. It's very much at the forefront of the work that staff is doing and that the board is interested in, has made a top priority. So affordable housing. So everybody kind of knows the deal with this, but in Fairfax and in the larger Washington, D.C. region, we have several critical challenges to providing housing that is affordable for all. So we have, our projections indicate that over the next 15 years, the county is expected to add more than 62,000 households, primarily working households. So demand projections indicate that 15,000 net new homes for families served at the 60% of AMI and below will be needed. About 30,000 low to moderate income renters are already paying a third or more of their income for housing, which is an indicator of price appropriateness and a real strain on families and households' income. Almost 71,000 households in the county are also earning $50,000 or less, which is an indication that a lot of these are stressed when it comes to their income and what they're going to be what they're going to be paying for in terms of their rent or their mortgage. So rising rents, stagnant incomes mean that Fairfax County's housing market, it's increasingly out of reach for these households. And it's an issue from a lot of perspectives. A lack of affordable housing, it really poses major challenges for attracting and retaining businesses. It's also an equity issue, as we all know, in terms of our One Fairfax policy, which is looking at how do we become a more inclusive community. From a racial standpoint, there are many challenges that affordable housing can solve regarding that particular issue. So what we've done more recently on this issue, back in 2018, the board adopted the community-wide housing strategic plan. And this had a planned goal of producing 5,000 net new affordable units over the next 15 years to try to stem the tide and try to meet some of this demand. So the housing strategic plan, it includes a number of policy recommendations for increasing the stock of affordable housing, but also preserving what we have. And a couple of these policies we'll get to in a second. So we are diligently working through the list of things that the plan recommended, and Abdi and I are working on a couple of those in particular. But before we do this, I wanted to provide you with a snapshot of what this means for county employees in particular. Here's a few starting salaries for county workers. So if you're just starting out at the county, this is what you could expect. So an accountant might make $51,000 a year. Police and fire, $53,000 to $56,000. Public nurses, $54,000. Equipment operators, $43,000. So if you combine this with higher rents, if you're paying $1,600 a month for a studio or a one-bedroom unit, that's about 37% of your gross salary if you're an accountant, for example, and making $51,000. So most of the folks that constitute these groups are kind of in that 60% of AMI range for the DC metro area. And folks really endure pretty heavy commutes in order to live here if they can't afford to work here. So a couple of folks in our department in particular, some live in PG County, some live as far away as Culpeper, Winchester, for example. So people are driving in despite the commute to try to make it work here. So that has real quality of life implications, as we all know. And in COVID times, it's gotten a little bit better, but I think we all kind of want to get to a point where there is traffic again, as kind of perverse as that sounds. So I know that this is a topic that is of great interest to folks, especially in surrounding jurisdictions, because it has impacts on surrounding jurisdictions as well. We know that having housing that's affordable to a range of incomes, it helps people to live here, reduces commutes, less traffic, less stress. It also helps us to retain and attract workers. So this is a particular issue that's been identified for the board for young workers in particular. So some of those that might be starting out in their careers, making those lower salaries relatively. And the board actually just established what is called a Young Adults Advisory Council to look at this specific problem in particular, looking at workforce retention and affordable housing being one of those things that is one of the issues that's most readily identified amongst the young adult population in terms of having them stay here in the community. It helps with reducing income segregation, so helping people live in vibrant communities with a range of experiences and a diversity of experiences. And of course, affordable housing, it also helps us to broaden our county's tax base. Abdi, next slide, please. And next, I'll turn it over to Abdi to talk a little bit more about the housing strategic plan and some of the targeted policy solutions that were developed that we're working on that have to do with specific income tiers. So Abdi, take it away.
Thank you, Graham. What I want to cover, as Graham mentioned, our agency, the Department of Housing Community Development, led to draft the community-wide strategic housing plan that was published in 2018, and that plan is available on our website. If you go to Fairfax County Department of Housing Community Development, the strategic plan really just kind of looked and identified where the need is. And for the purpose of this presentation, we're really just focusing on working households that fit into what we call the 50 to 80% area median income. And that could be for a household size of one, anybody that's making $44,000, or if it's a household size of two, somewhere close to $81,000. And this could be entry-level professionals or mid-level jobs in healthcare, education, construction, in the nonprofit sector. Our strategic plan identified there will be a need to add almost 6,000 of these units that serve these tiers. And the policy solution that was identified was either to invest public funds and land, as Alex mentioned in his presentation, or partnerships and land use policy. And what I do want to emphasize, our agency, Department of Housing Community Development, we administer federal, state, and local affordable and workforce housing programs. And what I'm going to cover is really just one or two of the tools in the toolkit, but there are other toolkits to kind of get at this problem. So the programs that we're going to be reviewing is not the main solution for these challenges. Next slide, please. The 80 to 100% income tier could be making anywhere from $71,000 to $101,000, depending if it's a household size of one or two. Once again, it could be either entry-level jobs, or it could be police officers, firefighters, school teachers, or even mid-level jobs in professional and business services, technology, and healthcare jobs. The plan identified there's going to be a need of almost 9,000, a little over 9,000 of these units that need to be added. And the policy solution that was identified were partnerships and land use policy, which I will cover in future slide. Next, please. And then the last kind of tier are the 100 to 120% of the area median income. And once again, these are households either making $88,000 to about $121,000 for a household size of two. And our strategic plan identified there will be almost 12,000 of these units that will need to be added in over the next 15 years. And the policy solution to address this problem is partnerships and land use policy. Next slide, please. So what I want to quickly cover are the tools, the land use policy or the public-private partnerships that are utilized to address the challenges. One of the programs that we mentioned earlier, the Affordable Dwelling Unit Program, it's been, the board adopted it in 1990, and it's provided for under the Fairfax County Zoning Ordinance. And what that means is, anytime there's new residential construction happening in Fairfax County, there's an expectation for a percentage of those units to be set aside as affordable dwelling units, either in rental projects or if there's a for sale home ownership project to create home ownership opportunities. Another tool and a more recent tool that was mentioned earlier is the Workforce Dwelling Unit Policy. This is a policy. It's not mandatory under the ordinance. compared to the ADU program. But it's a profit-based incentive system that's within the comprehensive plan. So anytime, private market developers are constructing Fairfax County, they're expected to set aside a percentage of these units as WDUs in exchange for bonus density or being allowed to build more market units to kind of offset the cost. What we're currently working on, our current policy serves anywhere from 60 to 120% of the area median income. But, we worked with a task force that identified the greatest need is between 60 and 80% of the area median income. So we're currently Graham and I are working on a comprehensive plan amendment to shift the rental program to deliver units at 60 to 80% of the area median income. Our agency is also working on preservation as one tool that we're looking at. They're what is referred to as naturally occurring affordable housing. And these are units that, they don't have any subsidy or any restrictions on them, whether it's federal, state, or local. But because of age or location, they might just naturally be affordable. And the county's looking to see how we could preserve these units to preserve and to maintain the affordability. And last but not least, there is what we refer to as the PPEA. And what this is, it's a public-private partnership that the county uses to create new affordable housing. An example of that, if right by the Fairfax County Government Center, we have the Residents at Government Center, which I believe are 270 units that were built and constructed and delivered by the county, partnering with private developers, utilizing the low-income housing tax credits to create that affordable housing opportunity. And I believe the land, the county provided the land. So this is one tool that we currently utilize to create affordable and workforce housing. And although since COVID hit, there are many projects that are either in the design or the construction phase throughout the county that's using this model to deliver affordable workforce housing.
Now shifting the focus a bit west to provide an overview from the workforce housing State of the Union, if you will, from Loudoun, is Deputy County Administrator for Loudoun County Government, Mr. Charles Yedden. Mr. Yedden joined Loudoun County Government in 1997 as the Land Use Review Division Manager in the Department of Planning Services. He moved to the Office of the County Administrator in 1999, working initially in the areas of land use, economic development, and development review. He was serving as one of 5 assistant county administrators when he was promoted to Deputy County Administrator in 2016. Among his current duties as Deputy County Administrator, Mr. Yudd is in charge of strategic initiatives and special projects. He serves as liaison to the Office of Elections and Voter Registration and the Department of Library Services as well as the Treasurer's Office and the Office of Commissioner of Revenue. He also has purview over public affairs and communications as well as the county's legislative program.
I do have a quote from our county administrator that I wanted to start off with and just read to the group. This is from Mr. Tim Hemstreet. Affordable housing and housing availability are critical to our ongoing success for all of our businesses and our citizens here in Loudoun County. And I think that we demonstrate our commitment to that through all of the outreach that we're involved in. Today's discussion, I thought, was best described when the localities are asked, what are they doing? What are they up to? Similar to what we heard from our neighbors in Fairfax, it's all about planning for affordability. It's all about having policies, and certainly our success depends on our partnerships. So we too have a bit of a recent chronology with respect to what we've been doing. And I think before I get into that, I just wanted to address one of the very key points that Alex brought up in his presentation. For Loudoun, when it comes to our budgetary situation, very shortly after the global pandemic presented itself, we went into a reserve mode. So when our board was adopting their FY21 budget, they held in reserve $100 million, 60 for schools, 40 for general government. And while that did not include, had not included a specific amount of spending for housing affordability, that really was for FY21 future enhancements. We are now at the point where we are going through a release of that reserve funding. Also, in the early days of the pandemic, you can imagine what it takes to pivot into an operational mode, to be responsive, to have our workforce spin into telework, but to continue to provide all of the services that are necessary. I can recall one day Mr. Hemstreet walked by and I said, you know what, I think I'm just going to keep going. And that's exactly what we have done here in Loudoun. And I know most of our neighbors in the region have done the same type thing. But for example, when it comes to affordable housing and the development process, the period of time we've been in since the beginning of the year or March timeframe has been a really good time to continue to work on entitlement issues, on policy issues, on all of the steps that are necessary to bring a project forward out of the ground. And obviously there is, global trepidation about economic trends. But with that in mind, we kept going with our processing of development applications, our full review of legislative applications by our Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors, and actually made some really good progress with getting our private sector development partners to the point of approval. And then just recently, Mr. Hart, who's with us today, we helped celebrate the opening of his project in Ashburn just a few short weeks ago. So while tremendous challenge exists in response to COVID-19, progress can also be made. Some of our progress in terms of recent years and in terms of the affordability issue in Loudoun stems from some of these plans that I referenced in this slide. Our Economic Development Advisory Committee has been a very key partner in the issues of affordability. A few years back in 2016, they looked into what is referred to as the nighttime economy. And what we realized is that a lot of our young people lived closer in Clarendon, Boston area. There was housing, multifamily housing in a supply adequate. And also there were things to do that more so than out here in Loudoun in the evening. But one of the hallmarks of that report was that affordability was key in order to get entry-level workers into the community and to keep our kids that may have grown up here here in the community. And if they couldn't afford housing, that was a major concern. As time went on, we obviously heard from our business community about concerns for the workforce. In fact, that became a hallmark of the comprehensive plan that Alex also referred to in his remarks. In 2018, EDAC came through again with a housing report addressing all of the parameters that we should be looking at with respect to development of good, sound policies. Those steps in 2016 and 2018 really became embodied in a new policy document, which was the comp plan adopted in June of 2019. In fact, for the very first time, we had a housing policy, a housing chapter embedded into our general plan. And we're quite proud of that. That chapter starts off with a vision statement such that the county would be encouraging and providing housing options that can accommodate a variety of lifestyles, households, ages, cultures, market preferences, incomes, and needs. So while this particular conversation today is about affordability, and affordability is so key to the county's success and the region's success, there are a whole host of other factors that need to be addressed when it comes time to have a good foundation of policies, requirements, and then projects and actions that result in the built environment and additional affordable units. Next slide. That bottom part of that prior slide was just introducing the component of our ongoing strategic plan, which is our unmet housing needs strategic plan. In the comprehensive plan, there were two major primary items on the to-do list. One of them was this unmet housing needs strategic plan, which is underway right now. The other was a zoning ordinance rewrite that is also underway right now. And while they're two different projects, there obviously is a linkage in that we would be addressing measures for increasing affordability in the zoning ordinance rewrite, and that we would also be developing key strategic measures in the unmet housing needs plan as further steps. We would also expect that that plan would have the same level of granularity that our Fairfax neighbors mentioned in their presentation, and that effort is currently underway. First and foremost, there has been extensive outreach and input into the process, because we have learned here in Loudoun that in order to be successful and to enjoy our continued success, our eyes have to be wide open, but our ears have to be open at the same time, so that we're learning what our community's needs are, and we're learning from our stakeholders as to what's important. This particular project, the Unmet Housing Needs Strategic Plan, is no different than many of our other initiatives that we've worked on. Bottom line, extensive outreach and input to the community. There's also another step ongoing, which is program and evaluation steps. There are components that our housing staff work on right now, whether it be down payment and closing assistance, individual loan programs, and then larger affordable project loans. And those efforts that we have underway are being evaluated for their effectiveness and for recommendations for modifications in the future, should any need to be made. That will be a component of the strategic plan. Also, there's a very key effort with regard to mapping and data development. We heard a little bit earlier about the existing housing stock being a naturally occurring affordable housing stock in certain areas. Well, in order to guide that properly in the future and address it, as well as all of our other programs, we have a very extensive mapping effort underway to look at the current housing stock, type, location, proximity to transit, proximity to job centers, on which to have that data to build on. Also, in terms of data development, any number of data points, where we are with AMI for 2020, where sales prices are for 2020, where we are for the amount of units in the pipeline. All of that is being evaluated in great detail to help serve as a good foundation to our policy work that's forthcoming. We are on track to go to the board in the first quarter of 2021 with that, with presentation of that plan. So great progress has been made. I'd also add another point that's not on the slide. We realized that in order to give greater focus to our housing activities, we transferred the housing division, which was formerly in the Department of Family Services, to right here in county administration, in the county administrator's office. So beginning in FY21, 23 employees came over from, approximately 23 came over from Family Services and are now a division of the county administrator's office. I think that's good evidence of the commitment to housing needs in the community. Next slide. The next slide is something the group may have seen previously. This is the principles that will be embedded into the strategic plan. Obviously, we need to attract and retain a talented and diverse workforce, but we also need to meet those stratification layers for housing opportunities for the full spectrum. Next slide. This continuum, I think most folks have seen this before, but we tried to explain to our audiences that where the greatest need is in terms of percentage of AMI, and there is, while one area deals more with workforce than another. As a community and a public serving body, we need to reach out to everyone and make sure that there are housing options in place. And you can see there is great need at that very low percentage, 0 to 30 of AMI. And then we also know that as that continuum progresses, up the income level, even beyond 100%. And there are efforts needed to fulfill that that housing need. Next slide. The strategies in a general description, you just want to take advantage of everything that you might have available to you. And I think we've learned this over the years that it's not one size fits all, or it's not one thing. It's a package of all that you can do. So obviously the availability of land, the basis of land in a deal, what funding opportunities might exist, and those are varied. It's not just one source well, it's everything you can get your hands on and have it work for you. Being mindful of incentives is important, whether that be something written right into the zoning ordinance, or how you structure your fee arrangements. And then obviously the structure of deals and partnerships is how you bring things up out of the ground. Next slide, please. Wanted to take a minute just to talk about some of our land use policies. Alex mentioned, and thank you for that plug on the comp plan earlier. We do have the urban policy area. That is, it's right around our metro stations. It is a new policy area in the comp plan, but it is limited in terms of its area. It's only about 2,600 acres, and there have been many entitlements that have already occurred in that area. However, shortly after the comp plan was adopted, we also had a zoning ordinance amendment that was approved for our TRC zoning district. And basically that allowed unlimited density. And that was a critical component to recognize that that's where you should have additional units. Also, for our suburban area, and this area that we have up on the slide right now is a graphic of our suburban area. You can see the pink areas, pinkish purple, along Route 7, up and down 28, along Route 50. That's our suburban mixed use designation. And that is something new in the comp plan, and it allows for a mixture of uses. And we have already seen some applications where some of our older retail areas have been rezoned for residential, consistent with this mixed use designation on the comp plan, and that has yielded some affordable units. Also on Friday, Georgia and I and Chris were having a brief conversation about today's discussion, and the question came up about the Dulles Town Center Mall. And folks may have seen where the property was foreclosed recently, and our economic development staff have been in contact with the principals, and they're very interested in taking advantage of the suburban mixed use designation. And you can see that area not very well on this particular graphic, but right at 7 and 28 is where Dulles Town Center is located. There's opportunities for mixed use in the future. And I think the current parties are looking at the property to perhaps lessen the footprint of retail, and to also probably make some modifications to address the shopping experience, and bring in some experiential environment in the future. So we'll be working together with the mall developers starting in 2021, and it represents an excellent opportunity for our mixed use designation and the opportunity for additional affordable housing. Next slide. This slide coming up shows a little bit more of the intention of that suburban mixed use. And you can get up to 5-story development, which might not seem very high when you compare it to our urban policy area and transit nodes. but is certainly adequate for a suburban style development, and a 1.0 FAR up to 1.5 with additional development standards. So that is a component of the comp plan. It does allow for the opportunity for additional supply of land that could be used for residential, in this case, mixed use, as a component of mixed use. We also have developed a public land inventory that we presented to the board last term, and we'll be reissuing to the board shortly if we haven't done it already. And that indicates all of the publicly owned property in the county, the potential for residential development, and the opportunities that may exist to leverage that ownership for affordable projects in the future. Next slide. Also key partnerships and efforts. Our ADU program is still in existence and has yielded quite a few units in terms of for purchase and rental ADUs as well. But we realized a few years back that that's not going to be enough. These are generated from the rezoning process. If you're not going to have large tracts of land rezoned, that would generate a large significant number of ADUs, then other opportunities, other options have to be pursued. We also got into the workforce unit policy and programs a few years back, realizing that the ADU range of income wasn't enough. There was also a need to bring workforce units online, and we've been very successful in working with the development community to embed commitments for workforce units into proffered rezonings. Next slide. This next slide you may have seen before. We got into the business of lending using our housing trust fund as a source of loans, and have been able to work with a number of developers and projects in recent years. You can see some of them listed left and right in the graphic. In 3 years with 6 projects, we've yielded 586 affordable apartments. And that side also includes some additional information on those efforts. We would expect that that type of arrangement with looking for those large affordable project loans would continue into the future, and that would be a recommendation of the Unmet Housing Needs Strategic Plan to continue that type of activity. And also, as part of that strategic plan, we would look into other funding measures that might exist. That needs a little bit more work, but that will probably be part of the discussion as we move into the next year.
Pivoting a little bit and joining us now to provide feedback on the demand for workforce housing and recruitment practices from a local large employer perspective is Mr. Mike Bennett, General Manager of Swissport USA and Hub Director of United Express. Mike began his work at AID in 1980, where he worked for 2 airlines, fixed-base operations, FedEx, and now Swissport. He was responsible for over 1,300 employees pre-COVID, servicing UAX and 23 international carriers.
My name is Michael Herndon Bennett. I was born and raised in Herndon, and I spent 4 years of my aviation career at Dulles Airport. And I don't have any slides to show you, but I do have a lot of experience in the recruitment and of the workforce here at Dulles Airport, and I hope that some of the information I give you is helpful. I've been the GM for Swissport. Like was mentioned, is we had almost 1,300 employees in 2019. The business is coming back to Dulles faster than other airports on the East Coast, so we're about at 50% right now. So back in 2019, the recruitment was very, very difficult. I guess it peaked in 18-19. Where we had 9 HR representatives, 2 recruiters. Raleigh-Durham was a satellite recruitment process, and we tried everything to recruit people. I won't go through the long list, but we covered everything we could, and we still ended up with about 25% of the workforce positions not filled throughout the year. So this was something that we had to deal with, and the shifting locations of where we were pulling from, I would say 2012, it started to change. And I look at it in two different areas. Our Herndon Reston area, there are some areas of affordable living, but I think that that pool has begun to shrink. Ashburn and Leesburg, much more difficult for employees to afford to live there. And I think those that do are in a multifamily dwellings. And what we saw shifting in the last few years is our recruitment was coming from the south. It was coming from Manassas, and then it grew into the Woodbridge area, where potential employees for these entry-level positions could afford to live, but they would have to commute 45 minutes, maybe an hour, to get to the airport and work. So that was a challenge for them, and it is a challenge for us to be able to fill the open lines that we have experienced over the last few years. As far as from Dulles Airport, from Tyson's Corner on down to DC area, very minimal draw there. We do have some people come from Maryland, but you would think that there would be more of a draw from the DC area, and there really isn't. We have seen it shift to south of the airport, and so that has been a challenge for us because the transportation for some of these employees is difficult for them to handle. What does the workforce look like? It's a very diverse workforce, very diverse. And most of these people have two jobs. And many of them work two jobs on the airport. So they, in order to afford to live and work at the airport, they usually, a lot of them have two jobs. They could be two full-time jobs. They could be a full-time job and a part-time job, but it is much higher than you would think. There are living, our wages are at or above the airport's living wage. It was incorporated maybe 3 years ago. I would say as an entry-level position, $30,000 annual. And you can see to live in the area around the Dulles Airport, that would be very difficult if you didn't have more than one job or you were in a multifamily dwelling. So I think that our challenges through the years have been with where are the pools of available labor workforce as they shift, and also as the airlines are doing more of a subcontract out where we handle 23 international carriers, and there's very few airline employees. Most of the work is subcontracted out for the airlines to be able to afford and to operate at the airport. They're looking at the cost savings and they subcontract that out, and that is why Swissport has become a very large employer at the airport. The largest employer is because of the shift to subcontracting the work out for each airline. Mostly it's with international carriers, not so much domestic. But we have 400 employees on the domestic side that we support United Express on the regional side. So very diverse workforce, but the challenges are there with the available pay and the ability to live within a reasonable commuting distance of Dulles Airport.
So last but certainly not least, to provide an overview of what measures can be done on local and state level to allow and incentivize the delivery of more workforce housing is Kim Hart. He's really Dr. Hart, but he's incredibly humble. and I will respect his wishes to be called Kim most of the time. Kim has over 25 years of experience developing, building, and operating affordable workforce housing. Between service to the nonprofit Wendy Hill Foundation and as general partner of for-profit Good Works LP, Kim with partners has developed over 700 affordable rental units, making him the largest developer of such units in Loudoun County. Prior to developing affordable housing, Kim spent 18 years as a consultant to the electric utility industry, both with his own firm and with Booz Allen Hamilton. He serves on Loudoun County Economic Development Commission and the Loudoun County Housing Advisory Board. In 2013, Kim won the Virginia Governor's Housing Award for Best Affordable Housing Energy Conservation Effort.
The topic you gave me were incentives needed to get more workforce housing built, affordable workforce housing built. And I laughed a little bit because we really don't need incentives. The incentives is the need. Big picture, in Loudoun at least, we're between 6,000 and 10,000 units short, between under 60% of AMI. And from what I see on the ground, here's the story. As you saw on Charles's slide, those three projects on the left were mine. Stone Springs, we opened in 2019. That's 128 units. It took us, after we got our occupancy permits, 2 months to lease it up 100%. Same year, we opened Herndon at Kincora. That was 96 units. That went a little better. We leased that up in 45 days. And the Ashburn Chase slide, which you saw, which we just had the grand opening last week, that's across from Whole Foods on Route 7. That's also 96 units. We had the grand opening last week, but we won't finally get our occupancy permits for another 7 or 10 days. But we're already 75% leased up, so we don't need any incentive. We got plenty of incentive. The market is basically unlimited. So what I really need is land and money. So this is Ashburn Chase. This is how the money gets spent. It's a total development cost of $28 million, 96 units. That's an average of $292,000 a unit. So these are not cheap to build. But here's what I wanted you to see: land 7%, construction 60%, and soft costs, including the cost of money, is the other 33%. That's 60% in the money in the middle. I don't get any break on. Nobody sells me a 2x4 for less or a yard of concrete for less. So if I'm going to rent a unit below market rate, especially down as low as 60% of AMI or 50 or 40 or even 30% of AMI, I have to save money on land, and I have to save the cost of money. And even if the land is zero, still that only affects the equation by 7%. Hugely significant, but it's not as overwhelming as you might think. First of all, low-income housing tax credits. Sorry, that's what you sometimes hear referred to as LIHTC. It's the biggest game in town. Without it, we'd have very little affordable housing. HUD is almost out of the business these days. It's the biggest game in town. It's highly efficient because the feds allocate the money, but the state does all the work of distributing it. In Virginia last year, and in Virginia, that's now done by Virginia Housing. Used to be called Virginia Housing Development Authority, or VHDA, now called Virginia Housing. Last year, Virginia got $20 million into Virginia. It's allocated by population to the state. But when you do the math, that's really every year for 10 years. So actually we got $200 million from the feds last year. And if you multiply that by all the states in the union, that's about $9 billion a year that's going into housing. So it is the big gorilla. But it's not nearly enough. So, and my last point on this slide, which I'll get to, is, lobbying the feds is a great activity that we can all do together regionally. So the first one I would ask that we support is there is pending legislation to significantly increase the amount of funding going to LIHTC, and that's something we should all work on. Next, I've got HUD, the Housing Choice Vouchers. This used to be called Section 8. This is really important because no state or local jurisdiction has enough money to really do housing subsidy down at the 30% AMI level. We just have to have Fed support. It is woefully underfunded. A county as large as Loudoun, with as I said, somewhere between 5 and 10,000 units short. We only have 600 housing choice vouchers. And since anybody that gets one holds on to it like the golden ticket, those only roll over about 10 to 15 to 20 of those a year, with over 1,200 on the waiting list. And 1,200 might not sound like a lot, but the waiting list has only been open in Loudoun once in the last 8 years. And the number of people that wanted to sign up were so many, they surrounded the entire family services building. So if we really want to help folks at the lowest level, we really need to work together to try and get the feds to beef that up and target to those of most need, which are the elderly, the handicapped, the developmentally disabled. And down, you might not think of it, but the Community Reinvestment Act, that's the act that causes banks to be required to invest back into their communities. That is checked by bank auditors to see how they're doing. You wouldn't think of this, but banks are the largest buyers of low-income housing tax credits just because of this. So from time to time, they talk about taking this out of the bank regulation. If you love affordable housing, please don't let them do it, because this is what makes them invest in affordable housing projects. As I said, Virginia Housing is the one that supports the low-income housing tax credits that are allocated by the feds. Virginia Housing is doing just fine. They run a great program. It's a fair competition, but with the tax credits they get every year from the feds, they are able to support about 1/3 to 1/2 of the projects that apply to them every year. There is so much more that could be done. So back to my previous slide, if you can do anything, help them get more money from the feds. Alex brought up the Virginia Housing Trust Fund. This is relatively new. It's really important because this helps fill the gaps in the capital stack that are not covered entirely by VHDA. And it's a great use. It's a great leverage of funds, because every buck that the state puts in, low-income housing tax credits are going to leverage that by $6 to $8. But as I've said to my friends in the county, if you don't put in the first buck, you can't get the 7 or 8 that leverage it. So whatever you can, this did suffer this past year because of COVID, but whatever we can do to politically support that, those annual increases in funding are just huge. Thirdly, a bill that did pass this year, Senate Bill 834, House Bill 1101, this actually passed. And as Alex said, Virginia is a Dillon rule state. The jurisdictions are allowed to do what the General Assembly says they can. And Alex, I think that you and I need to talk a little bit about this, but I think this did what you needed to see get done, because it not only confirmed the ability for local jurisdictions to have affordable dwelling unit programs, it actually added a lot of new words about new things that they can do in terms of added density and greater density bonuses, and a lot of the great ideas that folks were having in local jurisdictions but weren't sure they can do. I believe this bill will allow to have happen. So I think I'm looking forward to seeing what we can do with this bill to do more locally. One that didn't pass was House Joint Resolution number 2. This was a proposed amendment to Section 6, Article 10 of the Virginia Constitution. And what this does was it would allow real estate tax exemptions for affordable housing. Now, let me just back up for a little bit. And from my time at Windy Hill, this is what I learned. Back in the really old days, the General Assembly passed out the ability to have real estate tax exemptions. And so many, many years ago, with Joe May's help, we got all of Windy Hill's affordable housing exempt from real estate taxes at the state level. Well, then a few years ago, the state General Assembly woke up and said, boy, this is really a pain doing all this work. So why don't we hand that to the local jurisdictions, which they did. And, that has frankly made it a little bit tougher even for nonprofits to get certified to be real estate tax free. But nobody ever thought of making it to affordable housing. And now in this bill, they are actually proposing a section where they would allow affordable housing to be real estate tax exempt. So this is a huge one. I think it's got lots of support in Richmond. And they said the only reason it didn't pass this year is that constitutional amendments are supposed to be in odd years, and this was an even year. So I'm hoping that next year we can do this, and I'd like to think about all of our jurisdictions going together to help that. At the county level, and I'm going to focus on Loudoun because that's what I know best, Mr. Yudd already talked about the fact that Loudoun has just done its comprehensive plan, and now we're in that very tricky phase of getting that converted into a zoning ordinance. I do want to underline something that Charles said. Loudoun County has just done an incredible job over this last year of COVID. I had a project under construction. I'm happy to say that construction workers are used to wearing masks and they know how to socially distance so they don't kill each other. But inspectors don't have to show up. But the entire permitting process and inspection process went without a glitch. And we would have delivered our building on time if our cabinets hadn't been stuck on a boat coming from China. So, but we were only 2 months late, which isn't bad. And we had our grand opening last week. But okay, so in redrafting the zoning ordinance, here's a few things on my wish list. Obviously, there is some language in the current ordinance about density bonuses. I'd like to maintain and actually increase those. You see that I have a little thing there called ADU/AHU in Loudoun County. An ADU has one section of the ordinance, but if you use either funding from VHGA or HUD, you can be designated as an affordable housing unit, an AHU. And under that situation, you can take what might have been dispersed housing from around the land bay and put it into one building, which can more easily be funded by VHGA, which had a big impact in the last 3 years. If you notice from Mr. Yudd's 2 slides, in the previous almost 20 years of the ADU program, there were only a little over 300 ADU rental units actually produced in that period of time. And yet in the last 4 years, that's almost up to 500 now. So that you can see the impact of that change in the zoning ordinance. I'm also now working on a rezoning application where I'm requesting a reduction in parking ratios. Unfortunately, in a sort of greenfields history of development in Loudoun, 2 parking spaces per 1 residential unit was common. But my actual projects, which we've done the studies of, show it's more like 1.3 to 1.4, which is even higher than downtown areas. But even going to that saves a ton of money and helps me get more units built. In the zoning ordinance, I'd like to see some more design options, like maybe if you're doing ADUs, you get to have an extra story on a building, just because that's really low cost once you've got all that other infrastructure in place. That's great. And lastly, and importantly, I think we need to look at program options that aren't tied to rezonings. I mean, I know you guys are dealing with this inside the Beltway, but out in Loudoun, the whole ADU program is tied to rezonings. And, there have been some big monster rezonings over the years, and those have produced the ADUs that we have, but that land's going away. Those big rezonings are becoming fewer and fewer. So we really need to think of some new program options that aren't just tied to rezonings. I mean, I heard Charles say that it was COVID that got in the way of the line item in the budget, but I won't let him get off the hook without saying that, Madam Chair and the whole administration, you're on Scout's honor to get me a line item in the budget this year. It's way past time for Loudoun to do that. I do.
That's not exactly what I said.
Oh, okay.
That's okay. Keep going.
It's time for us to have a line item in the budget. We agree on that. As to the county land, I think the county has done a very good job of purchasing land in the past. There's not a lot of excess county land, but as we go forward, the opportunity to co-locate affordable housing along with county operations is a real good opportunity, and that's one I look forward to doing in the future. And then finally, just some incentives of how we might provide some incentives for development of affordable housing. In Loudon, the whole Board of Supervisors has really seen that if there's an exceptional commitment to affordable housing, they are willing to help it through the entitlement process in order to meet the funding obligations of the HDA. That's been very helpful. I think if we could find other ways that if a developer really commits to ADUs, they ought to be able to try and, one of the benefits could get through the entitlement process a little more swiftly, because that's a huge cost for any developer, any market rate developer. As to the Housing Trust Fund, it's up and running very well in the county. I think that if I would, on my wish list, is that we might do what they're doing in Fairfax now and get a second application round. In Fairfax, the first application round is for competitive VHGA projects, and the second round is for bond deals. And I think I'd love to see that happen in Loudon. And then lastly, the county, Loudon has a great history of waiving fees, which is well within the purview of the county to do that. They've been very kind to me on the projects I've done on that in the past. But now, if we can get this new constitutional amendment passed, the chance to have real estate tax abatements would be a really big deal as well. So that's what I see from down in the trenches.
I'm going to start off with questions. I'm going to have one question for each of the panelists, but I'll then, after the panelists that I direct the question to answers, if anybody else would like to add and answer that question, please feel free to do so. And Alex, I'll start off with you as one of the foremost experts, given your job on what's going on in our regional economy. You may have seen Jeanette Chapman's address, the 4th annual Fuller Institute address on the local economy that occurred just recently, I think in the last 2 weeks. And she said something that I was not aware of, and that is that for the last 2 years, in spite of the fact that we continue to have growth in the technology sector, that we had actual outmigration in the 25 to 34-year-old age cohort, and which was a little bit shocking to me, given how important that age cohort is. And I wanted to get your opinion on whether you think the issues that we're talking about here with workforce and affordable housing played a role in that, given your broad perspective on the region.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's difficult not to suggest that they played a role in it. I think as the folks in Fairfax were discussing, they're examining housing affordability issues as, a prime, factor in this. I mean, I'll speak solely as a Fairfax County school, student growing up, trying to, my first move was to Charlottesville to get a job where I was paying about $20,000 a year. And I think my rent was about $400 a month, $450 perhaps. I mean, Kim is smiling because he knows that there's no way you can get away with offering a rent like that in the DC area. And so if you are coming out of college, here, it doesn't matter, even if you can get a job, perhaps at Amazon, which is certainly paying, excellent wages, you can get up to that 80,000 mark, which is, 80% of AMI in Fairfax. And it's still going to be a real challenge to find this housing because the housing that does exist is extremely in demand. So why would you not, pursue a move outside of the immediate DC region? The main draw is, of course, nightlife, culture, restaurants, the benefits of dense urban living, which have now all been really hammered by COVID. I anecdotally know many, people my age who have moved back home with their parents because they don't feel like paying rent right now. And they may not, see any need to do so for the foreseeable future as this continues to go on. And the industry has started to notice that trend too. I was just on a panel with the Apartment and Office Building Association of Metro Washington, and they're seeing it. So I think it's a trend that, as you observed, was happening before COVID, and I am curious to see if it, really picks up.
This is Graham. I'll just echo exactly what Alex was saying, that we have, and I mentioned this in my presentation, but we have a new board, authority, commission, a BAC, as we call them in Fairfax County, that's looking specifically at the young adult population. And how do you better engage with this age bracket, from a land use perspective, from a civic engagement perspective. And the reason for setting up this new board, or council as we call it, the primary focus was affordable housing in particular, as well as civic engagement and how to better connect with people. So I would just echo what Alex was saying, that this seems to be the critical thing when it comes to that age bracket.
So we have a policy right now in Fairfax County where there is great encouragement to locate workforce and affordable housing in proximity to metro. However, that is from a cost standpoint, when you are looking at those FARs, that is in direct contrast with being affordable. And so is the perfect the enemy of the good, as Voltaire once said. Is that something that should be reconsidered so that affordable workforce housing can be put in a good location that may not be right on top of metro? What are your thoughts on that?
I'll take a crack. This is Abdi with Department of Housing. I'll take a crack at it and then let Graham also speak to the question. So, Joe, I think what you're currently referencing is the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors in 2007 and in 2010 adopted the countywide and the Tyson's workforce dwelling unit policy. And what that policy does, it encourages the development of either rental or for sale WDUs in exchange for bonus density. When the board adopted it, back then the policy serves 60 to 120% income tiers. And I think the board at that time, it was a different time, thought there was going to be a great need for the units at the higher income tiers. To date, about over 1,600 units have been delivered. Nearly all of those are rental. The good news is, they're being built and constructed and delivered in projects by our developer partners, and they're delivering the units. What we saw as a challenge is staff and our development partners, those units at the 100 and 120% income tiers are either at or above the actual market rents. So they're not adding any public benefit. So what we're doing now, the work that Graham and I are doing with our agencies, the Department of Planning and Development and Housing Community Development, where we worked with a task force over the last year and a half, from March of 2019 to March or June 2020. To that task force provided some recommendations to eliminate the higher income tiers, but also recognizing that there's a cost to providing those units at the lower income tiers. So adjusting the total percentage of units that are expected to be WDUs. So it was a little bit give or take. So the good news is, they're the program's working. They're being built, by transit, by metro and public transportation in areas where there's employment. It's just a matter of tweaking, the policy to make sure that it's providing the public benefit that was originally intended to do so. And lastly, what I want to ask, I think our policies are flexible enough that we look, if there's alternative proposals that are going to meet the need that the board intended, that I think, and hopefully I'm not speaking out of school, and Graham could speak to that those applications would be also looked at. And I'll let Graham add to the response.
Yeah, regarding the location of WDUs in particular around metro, you have Tyson's where, as Mr. Yudd was saying, in some cases you have unlimited density, specifically when you're within a quarter mile of the Tyson's area metro stations. That's an area where we've seen a lot of WDUs, but in particular to your question, one of the things that we're working on with this WDU policy plan amendment is some clarifying language that really kind of gets to existing practice, but helps make it very clear for the future that if you're proposing to do a higher density project, say multifamily projects, 2/2s, those, and you're outside of some of these activity centers, your redevelopment areas, your areas around the Silver Line, for example, transit station areas, the WDUs are going to be expected. And so this is existing practice in terms of when projects are going through the redevelopment and rezoning process. But this will be hopefully some helpful clarification that says that, yes, we want WDUs to be dispersed around the county. We don't want them just to be located in these higher density areas that are also happen to be, some of the most expensive places, so that we get some disbursement, so we get some workforce housing and affordable housing that's more equitably distributed across the county.
Okay, Charles, you've talked in your presentation about the housing need continuum and how important that is to keep moving people up that pipeline and addressing each of the components of housing need. I want to ask you a question that's tangential to this, but still critically important to the workforce and the housing needs of the region. And that is, do you think it's possible through various educational programs to help workers move up this housing need continuum? And I would note in both counties, you have NOVA, you have various universities that are helping to address this. Have you seen any evidence of this, Charles, in helping people to move up the housing need continuum and help supply the workforce that's so critically important to our region?
Great question, Joe, really. And what our experience has been very interesting. It came from the ADU program itself and our own employees participating in it. So as Kim mentioned, the ADU units would emanate from an approved rezoning, get built, waiting list for candidates to get into them. The intention would be, folks at prescribed income levels, but that also included a lot of our own county employees. Well, over the years, these folks have gotten into the units, but then their careers have progressed at the same time. And as they have gone up the management ladder and their incomes increased, they were interested in moving on with the continuum as well. Also, our demographic that we have been struggling with, I guess, for a number of years is that our cohort had typically been younger professionals in their childbearing years. And a number of years back, we were dealing with incredible growth in school seats. And so as one ADU homeowner may come in as a single earner, and they may have met another single earner ADU, that turned into the beginnings of a family, and that both individuals progressed in their careers and in the development of their family, starting their families here. So we have seen that. We also know through discussions with our post-secondary education partners, NOVA being a primary conduit of information, is that any additional certification training or training opportunities for folks to advance in their careers is a bonus. But it also presented the challenge for us in that wherever they were at their stage of career, we needed that diverse range of housing stock and housing affordable level to support them. So we would be very supportive of additional conversations like that. We would be picking up on that through the strategic plan discussions and our outreach. And it would be something that would be very cool to tie to a performance metric in the future.
This is Kim. I'll just chip in just briefly. At Windy Hill, we used to call that the housing ladder. Windy Hill had some very low cost units, which they built with their own funding. And therefore they had no debt and could keep the rents really low. Often we would see people come from either severe overcrowding or homelessness, some out of their cars, into that first unit where lives would suddenly sort of come together and start to have stability because they had an address and a roof. Then they could move up into but you have to in order to live in a tax credit unit, you have to have enough income to pay the rent. And so sometimes you would move up the housing ladder from one of Windy Hill's own private units up into a tax credit unit where you could afford the rent, then climb on up the ladder there a little further. We're thrilled to often be one of the main feeders for Habitat for Humanity, because after you'd lived with us for 3 or 4 or 5 years, you had a stable job, a good credit history, and we were the feeder right into Habitat. They liked our folks, and we loved to send them that direction. The Loudoun County needs more affordable ADUs for purchase, and to what the problem Graham's working on. The problem we have now is that when folks get to the higher end, we take care of, in our tax credit units at 15-60% AMI, we're taking care of the entry level folks, but it doesn't take long before they start cashing out. And we don't kick them out, but they start moving. They move up the ladder, and there are just they want to get better housing, they want to buy housing, and there just isn't enough of it to go around. So I commend Graham's effort. The one thing I would say is that one question that came up in discussions are, do people get stuck in affordable housing and not move? And in a discussion a very interesting discussion we had with some of my market rate developers, the turnover rate at our 50-60% units is almost the same as the market, because people are working folks just like every working folks, and their lives change. They get new jobs, they move. And so that's a myth that needs to get busted.
Mike, has the difficulty of your recruiting and retaining employees impacted the growth at Dulles Airport?
That's a good question, Joe. Has it impacted the growth? And and I forgot to mention, this isn't just Swissport. It's every employer at the airport that services the airlines are in the same position we are.
Sure.
Some other companies that are as large as us, almost as large as us, I talk to them frequently, and we're all experiencing the same problems. So it's not unique to Swissport. Does it impact the growth? I would say that, anybody familiar with Dulles Airport and how it's grown, obviously with the region, there are new international carriers coming in every year. And the facilities at the airport are over capacity. So the demand of new business coming to Dulles Airport has created the shortage of the available workforce.
Okay.
So, I think that when we look at that workforce, I wanted to add a couple things I was thinking about, and it may not be related, but it is, transportation and childcare are big drivers for the people who need to work. And when you work at an airport, you're not 9 to 5. Your schedules are very, they're 24 hours. They're all over the place. And I think some of the things that we run into is the ability for affordable childcare, transportation, not just housing, but it all comes into one. And that's, I think, what make it difficult to bring people in and retain them to satisfy the demand of the growing airline industry.
Kim, let me just ask you one short and I think direct question. How can the Dulles Regional Chamber of Commerce help you achieve some of the objectives you outlined for us with regard to legislation at the state and local level?
Well, the chamber is well known, both the Loudoun Chamber and the Dulles Regional Chamber. I have to say that the chambers together have done more to change the conversation over the last decade than almost anything I've seen. Because for the first 20 years I worked in affordable housing, it was all charity, and everything was seen as charity. Building affordable housing was putting a little bit of money aside for charity. In general, we had to work hard to get that funding. But I guess it's 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, everybody like Mike Bennett and so many employers around the county and around the region began to discover that the workforce just wasn't there. And then affordable housing became part of economic development. And I got to tell you, my life got a lot better. So just keep carrying that message.
Thank you, panelists. Great information. I'm glad you were here to share it with our members and guests. So thank you all, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Take care all. Thank you.
Thank you all.